Hello and welcome to American Amnesia. I'm Cliff Garner, your host, and a couple things for today. I was watching the Still Report. Bill Still does that show. One of my favorites. It's a pretty good little news program. Had a little item today on Russia to be debt-free by year's end. And it was kind of interesting what he has here. I'm going to read from the notes that he has for the video of this, and just to get this going, it says Moscow will pay off the balance of the debt inherited from the old Soviet Union days this year, according to a report on Friday in the Russian newspaper Izvestia. The final Russian state debt is owed not to banks, but to Bosnia-Herzegovina. $125.2 billion is still owed to those two nations as a part of an agreement after the breakup of Yugoslavia. A source inside the Russian finance ministry told Izvestia, the agreement has taken a long time to get ready. A preliminary agreement has been signed. The final version still just needs signing. It's just a matter of a few months. This final state debt of Russia will be paid off within 45 days after the final signing. Russia paid off a $60 billion final debt to what is known as the Paris Club, a group of 19 creditors, mostly in the Western Bloc, including the U.S. and the U.K., in 2006, 9 years ahead of schedule. According to an RT report, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the newly formed Russian Federation inherited a growing external debt of over $66 billion, with barely a few $billion in net gold and foreign exchange services. Foreign exchange reserves, What does this mean? Has monetary reform broken out in Russia? It would make common sense. Why borrow from banks when you can keep a balanced budget and print sufficient money to keep the economy humming? But is that the case? Another report 2 days earlier shed additional light on the subject. On February 15th, Reuters reported that the Russian central bank is worried that some regions of Russia, similar to the states in the U.S., are borrowing from private banks. Central Bank Governor Elvira Nabulina told the upper house of the Russian parliament on Wednesday, according to Reuters, quote, that the central bank was in favor of replacing the region's debt to banks with loans from the state budget, unquote. It is difficult to be sure from these skimpy reports, but it appears that Russia has gone totally rogue, economically speaking, and is no longer allowing the states to borrow from private banks and is even now encouraging their individual reasons not to do so. Could it be that this is the real reason that the Clinton, John McCain, Lindsey Graham axis is pushing war with Russia? Well, I'd like a better understanding of what Russia is doing economically, so this to Mr. Putin, you are welcome to do a Skype interview on this channel. And he goes on a little bit and talks about how he extends his formal invitation to Mr. Putin to come on his show. and I find this rather remarkable. The idea that Russia has pretty much taken care of its debts is rather interesting, in and of itself. And so this presents two different issues at the same time. And the fact is that it looks like Russia is getting its debts taken care of. I went through and looked at some of the articles going back to the beginning of this year even, and there's been some things about cyber hackers that broke into some accounts and stole millions of dollars from the central bank and some other banks in Russia, but that's a completely different issue, and really has nothing to do with their getting their economy balanced, in this way. However, there is a report from February 3rd, also from Reuters, on the central bank, and it's talking about its lending rates. And this is from February 3rd, 2017. Russia's central bank cautious on eve of dollar buying. And the bottom line here is that part of what they're doing to not only balance their economy and rid themselves of their debt, but to increase their holdings, is to buy dollars. Okay, and that what this is going to do, in part, is it will weaken the ruble against the dollar a little bit. Right now, it's running pretty high, and it's, what is it, 59, I think, and change on the ruble to the dollar, which is pretty high. I mean, it got down to the 20s for quite a while there. And so the ruble's actually not in danger of inflation, but it's the deflation is actually the issue here, to where the money is worth so much that actually people won't carry it in their pockets. So this is an issue. Whether or not it has anything to do with Russia going rogue is another matter. It does cause a certain amount of caution within the stock market within Russia, and it's turning it to a bit of a bearish market. And that is the summary, pretty much, of that article. And there's also the article that he mentioned himself, and it's very short, and this is all that's there. So I understand why he is concerned about them possibly going rogue. And it says here, and this is from February 15th, this is the very article he's referring to. Russian central bank concerned by region's debt to banks. And it's Reuters, February 15th, 2017, Moscow. Dateline, Russian central bank is concerned by region's debt to banks. Central bank governor Elvira Nabulina told the upper house of parliament on Wednesday. She added that the central bank was in favor of replacing the region's debt to banks with loans from the state budget. So clearly what they are doing, regardless of where the matter is coming from, is that they are offering the regions, the different areas within the Russian what used to be the Russian SSR, but within the Russian state itself, to be able to replace any debts that they hold to any banks with debts to the state bank. And so they're willing to intervene and replace any of those debts with their own money. That is what that says pretty clearly. And there is another article that came out the same day on the 15th, and that is this. Russian central bank says reaching 2017 inflation target may not be not an easy task. So Moscow, February 15th, Reuters. The Russian central bank governor Elvira Nabulina said on Wednesday that inflation was falling as expected, but that did not mean that reaching the 4% inflation target was an easy task. Addressing the upper house of parliament, Nabulinus also said that the interest rates should remain above inflation. The Russian central bank has targeted 4% inflation by the end of 2017. And again, it seems to be that their problem is, or at least their fear, would be to go back into deflation, which re-increased the value of the ruble against the dollar. So that would probably be where their biggest concern is. Deflation is the opposite process. We face inflation regularly here in the U.S. It's been a very steady process of our money being worth less, and that because our economy has grown in other ways, and costs have nickel and dimed us as consumers and wage earners to where we're dealing with working with less money, really, because the money is worth less because it hasn't caught up to the costs. Okay, so what they had in Russia that really was damaging was when they had the opposite process, in which the money was increasing in value, but it wasn't necessarily increasing in its utility. It wasn't being moved around as well. So what happens is that when it increases in value, that actually there's a certain amount of stagnation within the economy itself. So that seems to be where their worry probably is on the whole. But that said, this is something to think about. If they aren't going to deal with the banks outside of Russia, then this keeps people like Soros and a lot of our economic aggression, I suppose you could call it, that we actually mobilize against other countries, is not going to be able to touch them. Okay, so they're holding our banks and other institutions of money away from themselves. And they've already dealt with old Soros. Soros has worn his welcome out in a lot of places, Romania being one of them, and China and Russia too. There are just so many places that he really isn't welcome. Although his money goes where he can't often personally travel anymore, because he has been tried in absentia in many cases. So that is something that's probably provocative as far as certain of the powers that be are concerned. And with Trump talking about warming relations with Russia, this type of an issue becomes very potentially inflammatory for those people, and it's the reason why they've been attacking him so hard. Also, Lionel Nation, I don't remember his real name, has pointed out rather nicely that one of the things about a group like NATO, and one of the reasons why when Trump speaks against NATO, is that it's like a club, and you get in the club, you got to get your decoder ring, you get you learn all the handshakes, and you have to wear the uniforms, and you have to buy all the stuff from there, and so with NATO being particularly a military type of club, as it were, you have to buy all the right equipment. And it all has to kind of be interchangeable, intermatching. Turkey was getting into some trouble a couple years ago while I was still living there, because they were buying products from Russia and from China that would not fit into the combined arms set, I suppose you could call it, that was standard for NATO, particularly things like anti-aircraft. And not only that, there was the issue of that if they were to end up in fighting against them, that there would possibly be certain built-in weaknesses for them that would negate the value of what they've purchased, because they would be able to maybe override the radars and stuff of that sort, and things like anti-aircraft batteries, that sort of thing would be fatal. So that was a major issue with some of the purchases that the Turks were making, and so this clubbishness, we shouldn't laugh too much about it, because even though it's kind of a joke on the surface of it, when you start looking a little bit deeper, it's very deadly serious indeed. You are looking at people that are willing to kill over this, and there's a lot of money involved. And this is one of the reasons why Trump has been not only not accepted, but why that the bug-eyed, crazy attacking on him has occurred in the way it has. It's just totally absurd on the surface of it. But if you consider the money, the power, the whole shebang. I mean, what you have is a handful of people waiting for the apple to fall from the tree. They're just waiting. They're jockeying for position on this kind of ultimate power just falling into their hands, and they're fighting like crazy over this. And you have mostly people in America, and that they're all kind of waiting for it to come, and they're kind of hoping to push their way up and grab it before it hits the ground. Now, there's a lot to be said for this kind of a picture. Will it be the bankers? Will it be the government? Will it be the military? Will it be the civilian? Will it be the CIA? CIA's got a lot of advantages over the others. The military has to obey the commands of the commander-in-chief. In fact, it's very reliant upon that. Whereas the CIA has proven itself rogue before. So, when we look at things like the JFK assassination, and we start seeing certain faces and names popping up that are probably as much under the mafia as they are the intelligence agencies, perhaps we shouldn't be so surprised. That's one of the things that really is really rather terrifying about that, and that was, I doubt if that would have been an official say, operation of our intelligence agencies, but the evidence is there that at least certain elements within that intelligence agency, the CIA namely, was responsible and doubtless took part in the operation that ended up being the murder of our president and his subsequent replacement by a more willing tool, namely LBJ. So when we see this kind of reemergence, or at least reassertion by this potentially rogue element of our deep state, as we're calling it, and that's really what it is. It's part of the deep state, which is a little more complex than just the civil servants who are perennial, I suppose, from one administration to the next. I think that when we say deep state, we're implying on something a lot more formidable than just that. And not only that, when I lived in Turkey and they would speak of the deep state, we were talking about something a lot more explosive. So it's much more than just a little bit of the government. It's also certain economic and social powers that stand behind the government and that are in the government and directly involved with it, but at the same time not officially elected or part of it even. That this deep state is a substratum of what we perceive as being the power, kind of the power behind the throne, and even to where we can't even perceive it. I mean, it's deep. It's really an integral part of the society itself, and that there's the part that we're seeing raise its ugly head is the particularly dangerous part. However, there's certain individuals in various sectors of the elite, or maybe we should say factions of the elite, that are not presenting themselves forward, but they are definitely involved, and we can count bankers and stuff along those lines among those. So, at any rate, that's kind of going a little further afield than I was planning on, but the thing is that the deep state is a factor in every country, and that it has an international dimension that goes beyond just what we're used to watching. So you're seeing probably in as far as the powers that be in Russia are trying to maneuver themselves in a certain way that really ticks off the rest of the West and their elites, and that this has been going on even before Trump came along, and that what we were seeing with Obama and his policies through Ms. Clinton and her very obvious corruption, that they were actually favoring that, and that they were favoring that to such a degree that when we voted in Trump, that we really put a big kink in their plans, and they're not too happy about it. And as far as I'm concerned, they can just go blow. But at the same time, they do hold a lot of power over not only events within the U.S. but around the world. And so when we see these manifestations as they're coming out, understanding all of the dimensions of these is going to be very difficult. But I want you to see the fact that there is an economic one that is probably pretty well at the forefront, and that these issues, as I just read about, are definitely in play on this. And I'm going to poke around a little bit more and see what I can find more on the economics of this all, and maybe have a little bit more to add on this. Now, when I heard this report today, the first thing that came into my mind was some of the older programs that Dr. Joseph Farrell was doing, particularly in regard to kind of a crypto economy around the world that we really don't perceive. See, that's the thing about getting into conspiracy theories and conspiracies and stuff. I'm very fascinated with them, but I don't really buy into them as such. I do look into the nature of the facts surrounding them, and there's usually a few pretty good solid facts, and they're usually things that just don't fit in with what we assume is correct. Just something odd, something just not quite right about it, but it's still true. This is something that happened, and like I say, one of the things that Dr. Farrell was looking into, and every once in a while reporting on, was things like this cryptocurrency stuff, and I just found it really rather fascinating. That maybe, well, actually, I put it this way: reality, the true reality underlying that which we perceive, that objective fact. When you strip away the obfuscation and the some of the mythology that and disinformation is put up to protect it, that what you would find would in some ways look very much like a conspiracy theory, but it would not be any of the theories that we have been presented with. Those tend to be far too neat and far too tidy, that they're just organized, whereas reality can be very messy. And that maybe because our expectations are so different, that if we were actually able to fully perceive them, that we would not be able to accept it, and we would probably dress it up in a way that we would be more willing to take. Let's put it that way. So, with that in mind, there have been these anomalous events that have happened with, say, gold certificates from World War II, and things of this nature that have cropped up all over the place, usually around Switzerland at some pretty weird intervals, and they're actually gold that pre-war China had, and things of this sort. Where is that coming from, right? And we really don't know. But these are forgeries of something that did exist at one time, and they're good forgeries. So what's going on, right? And so I got thinking about him, and I hadn't heard anything from him for a couple of years now. He used to be on a program. What was that? The Bite Show. That's right. And the host from that program died a couple of years ago, and it's kind of, well, it's gone off the air, and I think it's still, you can still access some of the old programs there. I think the family is keeping it going, and hopefully they are. I often would, well, depending on who the guest was, but often the content would be a little bit kind of a little bit too strange, but at the same time there might be a little bit in there that was worth paying attention to, and so you go back and you kind of look at it and say, okay, what's going on here, and that's kind of what I was thinking. And so I went to Dr. Farrell's website today, and I came across this, and his website is called Giza Death Star. He believes that I don't know that I buy it, but he believes that the capstone on the original Great Pyramid was a huge crystal that was used as a laser weapon. I don't know if I want to buy that, but at any rate, he did have a rather interesting thing on this recent Flynn matter, and these are not entirely disconnected in my mind, because the economics and the possible underlying weirdness that was going on with Russia and with regard to the U.S. and things, that it like I say, it triggered my thinking towards him, and he has some interesting thoughts on this, with the Flynn Resignation being what it was, and then the really weird variety of things that we're hearing about this, that there's so many stories here that just don't seem to tally up. And one of the things that that Dr. Farrell went into is that he says something that kind of bugs him about this, and I'm going to kind of pick up right about here, just because this I think might get us where we want to go. And he says, now what always bothered me about the Flynn affair was something that this article brings out. Flynn would hardly have been unaware that his conversations were being listened to by American intelligence. So we do know that he was being recorded by the intelligence people, and that this information illegally has been given out and leaked out, because it should be considered very sensitive. But it's been leaked out to the press through certain individuals, and that and that this is, like I say, it's not legal. This is potentially treasonous. And it says that, and it was this factor that led me to entertain my suspicion that the whole thing was a sting operation to begin with. I've had some people say this, that they think that Trump knew that there was some kind of shenanigans going on, and he was pretty sure about the Obama people being left behind, that they weren't to be trusted. And so I've been hearing this idea of it being a sting. And so this isn't the first time I've heard it mentioned. This is a point which the article itself brings out, citing no less than the New York Times itself. But now comes the cruncher. The press, supposedly basing its stories on inside sources, cannot get the story's details straight. An egregious example of BMLS, Benghazi Memory Lapse Syndrome. I like that. I'll have to talk about Benghazi sometime soon. Well, after all, at this point, what difference does it make? Well, the problem, as the article points out, is this. Quote, a foolproof method of identifying someone talking to the press is to give him a specific story. If that story is published, you know where it came from, because it's a unique story. Why would the intelligence officials have so many different stories if they read the same transcripts? The only possible answer is that each official was given a different transcript. Why would the intelligence officials have had so many different stories if they read the same transcripts? The FBI cleared Flynn on January 23rd, and Flynn did not do anything illegal. He did nothing wrong outside of whatever issues were between him and Pence. And I understand Trump left it up to Pence as to whether he would keep him or not. The leaks were published February 9th. January 23rd, he was cleared. The leaks were published February 9th. So Trump has everything he needs to reform the CIA, NSA, etc. The FBI and Senate Intelligence Committee are going to investigate now. Trump ran his own sting a month back when he identified intelligence officials as leakers. Trump warned them that this was illegal. It appears that he's taken dramatic action. The end. Okay. Now, years and years ago, and this is Dr. Ferrell writing again, years and years ago, I wrote a historical novel, only part of which was ever published and self-published at that, in which the villain just happens to be the head of the Byzantine Empire's intelligence and the Foreign Service, the Bureau of Barbarians, and that's what it was called back then. This individual suspected that the Emperor Charlemagne had a spy in the Byzantine imperial court, but he did not know who. So he held a party during which he pretended to let various suspects know that he had a spy in Charlemagne's court. But to each suspect he told a different name of his spy. When Charlemagne executed a particular individual for espionage and treason, the Byzantine spy master knew who among his suspects was the spy. It's a classic case of what people in the spycraft call dyeing the waters, right? Coloring them. In this case, if the article is correct, and various people were shown different transcripts, then several waters were dyed, and several sources for the leaks are implied. And if this was a sting operation of this sort, then it also has enormous implications for the political fallout as well. For with congressional investigations pending, those within both parties who are opposed to the administration of Mr. Trump will be confronted with some embarrassing information. But that, of course, is all high-octane speculation. Time will tell. It does seem rather logical. And it's also remarkable. Heads are rolling, folks. Heads are rolling. I will post this article. It's called The Flynn Thing and Dyeing the Waters, a Sting Operation. And I'll also post the Reuters and the Bill Still program. And that way you can refer to those on your own. And meanwhile, I'll say good night from American Amnesia.